Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Elements Provar webinar. Elements is the #1 Salesforce management tool. Provar is the #1 test automation tool. And our goal for today is to show you both products so that you understand how well they work together. We're going to be going through this in stages. So Ian Gotts, who's the CEO of Elements, will present Elements first, including a demo, and myself, Alex Sherwood, who's the Director of Product Marketing at Provar, will be going through a little overview of Provar along with a short demo building a test. At the end of the webinar, we'll be answering questions, but if you send chat questions throughout, we'll be able to answer them at the end. And for everyone who's registered, we will send you a link to this recording as well as the deck that we're going to present. Thanks for joining.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex, for inviting me to join. I want to spend a few moments just talking about how Elements can dramatically reduce the effort it takes to build and implement Salesforce. But more importantly, make sure that the user stories that have been passed to test and development are really well understood to make sure that we focus our testing effort effectively. So if you look at the slide on the screen at the moment, you can see the implementation lifecycle. Now, I'm sure all of you do all these steps. You may do them with ad hoc documentation. You may not do them written down at all. But what you do is you all capture ideas and you capture feedback. You define some business outcomes, maybe formally in terms of some business requirements. And at that point, you then have to define the fit gap, understand what changes need to be made. And that's the point when you start to define the user stories. So they are the technical pieces of work that need to be done, the changes you're going to make to Salesforce. And that's the point when you can then start to understand the impact, the technical impact, the operational impact, and the regulatory impact of making those changes. And that's when you can start to assess the risk. Once you have that risk associated with the user story, you can then pass that across to the development team where they can build and then test the solution. As they now have a good understanding of the user story, the metadata changes that need to be made, links back to any other documentation, including the processes, that means that they can focus the development and test efforts effectively. Once you've been through that phase of building and testing, then obviously you're releasing the product out into the main solution. And then we go around the loop again, where obviously the system is being used in production, and then we're capturing more ideas and feedback to go around that cycle. The trick with all of this is to go around that cycle as quickly as possible with the minimum amount of effort, but also reducing the risk. The faster you go, sometimes you break things, and therefore we need to make sure that we have a really good understanding of the implications of making changes to reduce that risk. But today, what I really want to do is just focus on two boxes: the quick wins, how you define those user stories, and then how you understand the risk associated with them. And that's what the demonstration is going to be about. This looks like a horrible slide, but it actually identifies all the different documentation that you're likely to capture. All of those would probably are in ad hoc documentation, spreadsheets or Word documents that you have. Elements puts all of those into one database. A list of feedback, a list of requirements, your list of user stories, process maps, entity relationship diagrams, links to all the supporting documentation, and then a metadata dictionary where we pull all the metadata out and do all the analysis for you. And you can see the relationship diagram in the center. You can see that all of these documents are all interrelated. And the power is really in those interrelationships. The fact that you know that a particular user story is linked to a requirement, is linked to a process diagram, and is linked to metadata items, that's where the power comes. But again, just for this today, I'm not going to go into all of this. I just want to focus on the quick wins. I just want to focus on user stories and how we link those to the metadata items which are created in the Elements metadata dictionary. And that metadata dictionary pulls all the metadata from Salesforce. It then does all the analysis, the where used analysis, and the interrelationships, the dependency analysis. So let's see how that works in practice. So here we are in Elements. First of all, Elements runs on AWS, so it sits outside Salesforce. That means it can obviously be used for the implementation of any changes, not just Salesforce, but it has a tight integration into Salesforce, which is how it connects all the metadata. So here we can see there are 4 major releases, and we're going to look at the first release. And if I click on that release, I can see in that release I have 4 user stories in various statuses in terms of in design, ready for release, being implemented, and in design, and also a risk associated with the release. And what we want to do is, for this particular demonstration, is look at this, the first of the user stories called Create Opportunity. And I've selected that, and you can see the right-hand side is giving me more information about it. The summary, the description, the acceptance criteria, who created it. This has been assigned to Alex, so he's going to make sure that this user story gets taken through the cycle. I can look at the risk associated with it. This happens to be medium risk. Obviously, I can get into a lot more detail in terms of assessing the risk. I can add documentation. I can see there's a specification, a video link of the changes that want to be made. And I can see links here to various process steps. So inside Elements in the process mapping tool, we've drawn out some of the process diagrams so we can see the changes that need to be made or the implications of those changes. And obviously we can also have discussions here about this particular user story. So the development, test, and the business analysis teams can all have a discussion about this user story. But for the purpose of this demonstration, we want to understand the risks associated with it. So I can see here are the links to all the metadata items that are going to be changed based on this user story. And I can see that there are fields, there's a new field being created, and we're updating a page layout. We're deleting a couple of page layouts. Now, this is important information going through to the test team because it gives them an understanding about what needs to be changed. And obviously, when we're doing the testing, we need to make sure we're considering these metadata items. So let's quickly see where these items or these links have come from. Elements synchronizes all the metadata from your org, production and/or sandboxes, and it builds this tree, and it gives you a summary for everything that's in the org. And it's a tree structure. I can open up any one of these items, and if I click on there, on the right-hand side, it tells me everything about the item. But I want to go down to that object, that opportunity object, because that's the one that we're looking at. And if I look at the opportunity object, again, it will tell me everything about the object, how many records by record type, and then an assessment of every single field. So it's doing a field impact assessment. I can even see the field population. So which fields are populated or which have no data at all. And if I go down a little bit further, maybe down to one of the fields, so the close date, when I start looking at the impact assessment, again, records by record type, it's used in one global action, it's used in 6 page layouts, and it's not used in a bunch of other places. And again, we can add documentation about why we make changes to this particular field, how it's used, maybe help. But the important thing for this demonstration is you can see that this field is being changed by 3 different user stories. Number 1, which is the one that we're worrying about for this demonstration, but I can also see there are 2 other user stories. So that's quite concerning. Yeah, we're creating it here, this one called close opportunity, but this user story number 6 called the delete this field and split close date into 2 dates. So we immediately spotted a conflict here that we need to resolve before we start getting to build and test. So let's just look at one other area where we can look at a lot more analysis about the changes that we need to make. So here's an example of a budget field. We can see, again, records by record type. This one is used in a lot more places. You can see it's used in, say, 2 validation rules. I can roll over it, and I can see more information about the validation rules. If I click anywhere I see the little blue cloud icon, that will open up Salesforce in setup on that page. But what I want to show you is the dependency tree. So we've already looked at where an item is used at a single level. But with the dependency tree, we can now look at not just where this field is used, but any related or any dependent items. I can see this field budget was the one we were worried about, but I can see that it also affects the custom field, and there's another custom field there. Or if I'm looking at this report, maybe this report includes some dashboards. So just because I'm changing one field doesn't mean that that should be the only thing in the user story. I may need to go and add other items to the manifest. Maybe this validation rule also needs to be added, and I can simply add it to a user story by clicking paste story link, deciding whether it's create, update, or delete. So we're going to update this and simply attach it. So I can use the user story to work up my way around and adding more items to that user story. Because the most important thing is that the user story that gets passed through to development and test is, number one, accurate, number two, has all of the metadata items, number three, we've done a true risk assessment to make sure that we haven't forgotten anything, and finally has enough documentation to make sure that both development can build it, but secondly, there is enough information to build the test cases. So this is where we pass it across to the development team, and then I'll pass over to Alex to talk about how Provar testing can make sure that we can build repeatable tests.
Thanks, Ian. As an ex-manual tester, I can absolutely see how Elements would have saved me hours and hours and hours instead of just testing the process that I knew about without really knowing how the org was put together, and then only finding out after the fact that we had a lot of other things we needed to test. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Provar, and when that's done, we'll go into building a test with Provar so you can understand how all of these things fit together. Provar is driving the Salesforce testing revolution. We're dramatically increasing the productivity of folks who test Salesforce, not only through a great product, but by delivering everything that's needed for success. Tools that deliver rapid ROI, platforms for learning not only the product, but best practices, strategic consulting that can help with the big picture as well as individual business requirements, and a support team that has deep experience in Salesforce and Salesforce testing. We were founded 7 years ago by Salesforce experts who saw a gap in the capabilities of existing test solutions and built something custom fit to Salesforce and its users. We've grown to over 100 employees in the US, UK, and India, and we have an amazing list of Fortune 500 customers and worldwide partners. Provar was designed from the ground up as a Salesforce-specific test automation solution. This is very different than the approach taken by most of our competitors, which was to take an existing generic solution and make it fit for Salesforce. Our target has always been to enable the non-technical Salesforce user with a no-code product that delivered productivity quickly, which built tests that would work across a range of Salesforce platforms and be break resistant release after release. And because enterprise customers always have other applications connected to Salesforce, we built for integration and to make sure the customer can build tests that cover a process end-to-end across multiple applications. One of the keys to our success is Provar's use of Salesforce metadata to make test building much faster, much simpler, and more resilient. Tests that just work. Because we're so focused on Salesforce customer success, you can be sure that your tests will continue to work with each Salesforce update, and will support new Salesforce technologies like Lightning Web Components and Salesforce DX, so that Provar is ready whenever you decide to move. And while Provar is designed for no-code testing, we built in a lot of extensibility for those who need it. API calls, functions, and more for serious power users. The end result is that Provar's solution is extremely intuitive. We like to say, if you can use the application, you can build a test. Our use of metadata means that clicking a button and adding it to your test will deliver all the information you need to add a very well-defined and easily understood step to your test. We also let you build a test by validating steps one at a time. which makes sure that when you're finished, your test will run. Provar's intuitive approach makes test builders productive more quickly, and the resilience of our mapping makes for break-resistant tests, which really drives down maintenance costs. I'll start by showing you an overview of Provar, and then we can get into building a test. What you see here is the Provar desktop. On the left is Navigator, where you can keep track of and organize your tests. In the middle is the test case we're actively working on. And on the far right is the Provar Assistant, which gives you context-sensitive help for anything you're looking at in the test case. On the bottom left, we have problems, so I can look at any errors or warnings that are associated with my test. I have test settings, which is basically all the configuration information about your tests. And what we're looking at here is connections. Each Provar test requires a connection to access the application it's testing. And you can see here, not only do you have Salesforce connections, but you've got connections to other applications, like in this example, a Gmail account and Shopify applications, e-commerce. The great thing about connections is they're super easy to set up and use, and more importantly, easy to share. So if I need to build out a connection for each profile I'm testing, so maybe it's a admin or a sales user or a marketing user, I can do that with connections. And because these things are shareable, your entire test team doesn't have to remember a bunch of usernames and passwords to be able to run their tests against particular orgs. On the right of that is Test Runner, which shows you the live output of any test along with historical results of tests you've run in the past. And to the right of that is the org browser. And what we're seeing here is all of the metadata associated with the Sherwood CPQ connection, which is the org that I've connected to run this test. Before we get started looking at the demo of building the test, I want you to keep two things in mind. First, how easy is it to build the test? How quickly could a manual tester come up to speed using Provar? Second, how much Salesforce specific content is delivered by the testing tool? How easy is it to set up a test? How well do tests work just out of the box? And last but not least, how much maintenance do you need to do with your existing tests whenever Salesforce issues an update? Okay, enough of the background. Let's get on with the test. Let's start by creating a new test case. We'll name it. We'll pick a connection name, and we'll pick which Salesforce app we're using. And click Finish. And what's been launched, this application here on the right, is Provar Test Builder. And that is where all of the magic happens when we're building our tests. And you can see that Provar has automatically handled my login to my org, so I'm ready to go. Let's create an opportunity. Click on the Opportunities tab, click the New button, and add it to the test case. And this is a great example of Provar delivering everything you need to understand what's going on in a test step. I know that I'm on the opportunity homepage. I know that I'm looking at the New button, and Provar has predicted that what I need to do with this is click. So I'll just click Add and Do. And you can watch the step execute in the browser window on your left. Now let's add an opportunity name. And once again, Provar is keeping track of where I am and what I'm doing. It knows I'm on the new opportunity screen. It knows that I'm looking at the opportunity name field. It knows that my interaction needs to be a set value, and it gives me the field to set the value. So we'll set it. Click Add and Do. Now let's add a close date. And instead of putting in a static value, let's add a function that allows me to let Provar calculate a date. So instead of just typing in today's date or whatever date, I can put in today's date plus 30 days. And now let's save the opportunity. Okay, so we've thrown an error. And this is an example of another validation step we could add to a test. So let's validate that the error message is correct. Once again, Provar is doing a great job of keeping track of what I'm doing. It knows that I've clicked the page errors field, that I need to assert a value, and I want to assert that the expected page message is correct. So we can just click Add and Do. And instead of having UI assert here, let's put in something that's a little more descriptive. And spell correctly. And now let's go ahead and set the stage. And add that step. And now we can save the opportunity. And let's add another validation. Let's confirm that the probability is the correct percentage for the stage that I've picked. And once again, Provar is doing a great job of keeping track of where I am. It knows that I'm on the detail page, that I'm on the probability percentage field, and that I'm going to do a read assert, and I want to check that the value for that qualification stage is 10%. Click Add and Do. And to finish this off, what I'd like to do is to create a feedback loop to Elements. In other words, making sure that Elements has the information about the results of the test case. There are a couple of ways we could close that feedback loop with Elements. One, we could add a comment to Jira updating that user story, or we could send an email. In this example, we're going to send an email. I've closed Test Builder, and what you're going to see now is Provar Test Palette, which is a great way to add more functionality to an existing test. You can see where you can set values, you can set conditional statements like if then, you can add wait steps, And in this case, we're going to send a message. So I'll drag and drop that and pick a connection. And this is the connection to the Gmail account that we talked about earlier. Put in contents of the message. Put in a subject. And then who the message is going to. And save it. And it's that simple.
So thank you, Alex. That's fantastic. So now I think all of you can see how Salesforce is an amazing platform, but it really requires amazing tools to make it really hum and really work. So Elements, making sure you understand what you're building, so you build the right things, and then Provar testing to make sure that you're delivering applications that work. So we're very happy to pick up any questions that have come up in the chat, and we'll go through those now. So if Alex is going to join us as well, let me start off with some of the questions that have come up in the chat. I'll pick up some of the Elements questions, and then there are a couple of questions that have come here for the Provar team. So the first question is, what's the pricing approach for Elements? So first of all, Elements is priced based on the size of the org. So one approach is as a percentage of your Salesforce spend, and therefore you get unlimited licenses. The other approach for people who are starting on smaller projects is based on the number of users in the org and the size of the org. And we typically see people can get up and running within the day. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to get set up, and us to synchronize and build that dependency tree, the whole of the metadata side of things. So a couple of related questions that come out of that. One was, how does that dependency tree get created? It's on demand, so you can choose any metadata item, go to the right panel inside Elements, and by the way, that right panel appears also inside Salesforce Setup. Click Create Dependency Tree, and it will then build that tree for that metadata item. So any metadata item, it'll build that tree for you. And then a second related question that's just come in, which was, in that case, how do I create that user story? So the user story, which then gets passed across to Provar with all the information. So 3 ways you can create a user story. Number one is you can synchronize it with Jira. So if you're running Jira, there's a synchronization, and it will then pump all the Jira stories into Elements, or any stories that are in Elements, put those into Jira. The second is if you have them, say your user stories are in are in some database somewhere, custom object, Excel spreadsheet, whatever you use, you can import those from a CSV file, so you can pre-populate them. And finally, you can add them manually. So a couple of those questions. I've got some other questions that have come in, but I'll pass over to Alex to pick up some of the ones around Provar.
Thanks, Ian. Before I get into the Provar questions, I'd like to introduce Michael Daly, my colleague at Provar. He is a DevOps consultant, and if you've got questions about the inner workings of Provar, or more especially how we fit into the DevOps space, Michael is your guy. And in fact, this first question is one that's perfect for him. Does Provar handle API testing?
Yeah, so good question. So Provar actually does have built-in capabilities to natively handle API testing, which is one of the ways that we handle a lot of our integrations with third-party tools. So it's in the same manner that you saw Alex setting up a connection to Salesforce. You would be setting up a connection to whatever your API endpoint is, and then making your necessary calls from there. And that's all contained within the system. It's not a third-party integration or anything like that.
Thanks. Next question. How long does it take for a non-technical manual tester to become productive using Provar? Great question. Because there's a lot of manual testers out there. I are one of them, was one of them. And the simple answer is Provar is fantastically good at getting you up to speed quickly because of all the work that was done behind the scenes using metadata to make it really, really accurate at mapping fields. With other tools who use locators like with CSS or XPath, their success rate is relatively high early on, but if there are any changes to the application, which we all know happens all the time in Salesforce, then those locators tend to break. With Provar, because we're using metadata, they are very resilient to any changes in Salesforce. The other thing that Provar does well that other tools don't quite seem to have this process sorted out is that when you're building a test in Provar, what happens is you build a step at a time and validate the step incrementally. You don't have to go build the entire test and then run it and wait to see if the test is going to run. So because of the capabilities that we have to deliver a lot of configuration detail with each step as you create it, it makes it super simple for somebody like me as a manual tester or a business analyst to build a test quickly. The other thing that I noticed as a business analyst, when you are trying to figure out how to set up a plan for manual testing, there is always a conversation about the business process that takes place between the business analyst and the IT person or the QA person. And there is always an iteration, multiple times to get that process completely sorted out. With Provar, you really don't have to explain the process. You can just go build the test. And I would also add to that, I mean, the first time I saw Elements, it was a real epiphany because that is exactly what Elements is capable of and designed to do, is to help you explain what the process is, what the plan changes are, so that everybody's entirely on the same page. And I think, let's see, let's have another Elements question.
Thank you, Alex. Absolutely. That point about if you know what you're testing and you know what the business process is, then you can make sure you build the right tests. If you're just looking at metadata items, it's quite hard to try and guess what you're trying to create as the test. So that relates to one of the questions, which what are the typical benefits of using Elements? And they come in a couple of different areas. We're seeing up to 25% improvements and reduction in waste just because you're understanding the business process. Just creating that business process means that people are identifying, oh, I don't need to do that. Oh, why do we do that? So we're cleaning that up before we even start trying to build. So that's the first benefit. The second is we're seeing 80% reduction in rework. If you understand what you should be building, so end users often say, oh, I need this. Well, do you really need that? I know you say you wanted it, but do you really need it? Let's understand what the real process is. Let's understand what you really need to be configured. So someone's saying, oh, I need a pick list. Well, do you need a pick list? Maybe it would be better as a record type. So actually really understanding the requirements before you start building means that you're building the right thing, and all that effort in terms of development and test is devoted to building the right thing. If we can reduce all that iterative rework, then we can build the right thing more quickly. So that's where we're seeing some of the benefits. The other benefit is up to 50% reduction in terms of org analysis. We're doing all the really heavy lifting of all that dependency tree, the where used, where fields are populated. If you think how much time it would take wading around setup trying to find these things, we're doing all that work for you against production and Sandbox every single night. So we're giving you a far better picture to work from. So I'll pick up one more question and we'll go back to Provar. How do you get started? Well, go to our website, go and book a demo, top right-hand corner on our website. It takes about 2 minutes to get your org connected to Elements. It takes us between, 15 minutes and 2 hours to do all that org analysis. So that all happens relatively quickly, and then you'll be staggered by the level of information you'll get straight out of the gate in terms of what's inside that org. So Alex, do you want to pick up a couple of your questions?
Sure, and actually, I know you were kind of preaching to the choir in terms of, recently, well, as part of putting together this webinar, I got a firsthand experience about how easy it is to get a trial set up. And Ian's not kidding, it really is a 2-minute process. I was astounded. I mean, to be fair, you have to, go have a coffee or, a dinner while you're, while Elements, goes through your org, but the end result is nothing short of extraordinary for the literal lack of amount of work I had to do. And I mean, gosh, everybody has worked in a place where the people who built what you're working on left 3 generations ago. And so just in terms of the time to get a good, clear picture of what's going on inside, it was idiot proof for me, and that's saying a lot. Okay, next question for Provar. How do you know, how does Provar alert you to metadata changes for tests you've already built? Michael, can you take that one?
You're on mute.
This is probably better. Yeah, so this is a good question. Any changes that are made to the metadata, whether it's a Salesforce admin or a dev, say they're like adding a new field to an existing standard or a custom object or something like that, this is going to require you to refresh your metadata in order for Provar to recognize those fields and capture them using the test builder. And this is done using the org browser inside of the desktop tool. There's a small window in the bottom right where you can refresh your metadata, so that way it'll pull down all the relevant changes, and then you can begin testing those newly added fields or whatever the case may be.
Awesome, thank you. Here's another question. Can Provar work independently of Elements? Yes, absolutely. We are, well, like I said, I showed you a very simple email feedback loop, and you can also update a JIRA issue with a comment or create a new JIRA issue. That said, both of these products work entirely independently. Let's see, is it possible to create a test in a sandbox and then play it in other sandboxes and in production too? Yes. All that you need to do, and Michael, correct me if I'm making a mistake here, but all you need to do is to change the connection that that test is associated with. So you can create a test and then change the connection and run the test against whatever org the connection is pointing to.
Correct. Yeah. The part of the appeal for Provar in general is that the tests are not built towards a specific environment. They're built towards the actual test case itself. So ideally, you would build out a test case in one of your lower level environments. And then once you're ready to migrate those same changes to a higher level, you can then rerun the same test scenarios against those environments because your test was built against the metadata for the org that you're testing. So all of the changes should be the same, assuming you've pushed everything, and then from there you can run your test cases.
Thanks. Ian, back to you.
So we've got a number of questions about the dependency tree, which is normal because everyone gets really excited about that. So just to be clear how we build that, we use the metadata API for Salesforce, the dependency API, and a bunch of our custom code. And the first questions were, can it do anything to do with Einstein? And the answer is no. At the moment, we're only relating between anything inside, inside the platform. So Sales Service Cloud, but also any of the managed packages that you've installed. So we're only looking inside an environment. So things like Einstein Analytics, which is obviously not integrated into the platform, or Pardot, which is not integrated in the platform, we can't see that metadata to do the dependency tree. However, you can build a separate tree for, say, Pardot or Einstein Analytics and make your own manual connections. There is a second question, which was around, can the dependency tree know about things which have not yet been created? So one thing you can do inside Elements is you can create proposed items. So here's a new field I'm thinking about creating, or here's a new Apex class, or here is a new record layout. You can add those, and then you can start adding documentation. You could include them in a user story, include them in a test. When that item then gets created in Salesforce, we'll make the connection. but obviously we can't build a dependency tree about something that we don't currently know about. So that's a couple of questions around the dependency tree, and one related question, which is the dependency tree created for every test case? But no, you create it on demand. So if you're looking at a particular test case and you're looking at some metadata items, you can go into Elements, look at that metadata item, and then build the dependency tree by clicking a link, and it will build the dependency tree. So we're not creating a dependency tree for every single item. That would be just an enormous amount of overhead. So we're doing it on demand. So Alex, over to you. Any questions that you've come that you need to pick up?
Yeah, here's one, which is, how do I get started with Provar? The easiest way to do it is to go to our website and fill out a form, which I think is called Connect with Us. And once you do that, we will get on a quick chat with you to kind of understand what you specifically need, and then very easily set up a trial. And that trial has a trial guide, and you'll have a person, a consultant who will walk you through getting started. And this is one of the things that I did very early on at Provar. And honestly, I started the thing over the weekend and just went through the entire trial guide myself and had a pretty clear, understanding what was going on after that. And since then, it's been, getting help as needed, but it's a very, very straightforward process. So the short answer to your question is go to the Provar website and look for the Connect with Us form, and we will happily take it from there. Let's see. Here's another question for Michael. How does Provar handle custom layouts or custom page objects?
Yeah, it's another good question. So the metadata feature is strictly for things that are built into the metadata. So for example, that includes standard and custom objects and standard and custom fields, but things like Lightning Web Components, Visual Force pages, Aura components, those types of things are more customized. And so they're not always baked into the metadata. So we have to use another path of recognizing those elements and building out scenarios for them. So the way that that's done is the test process and the test authoring process will be exactly the same using the test builder. However, whenever you interact with those particular customized components or page objects or whatever you're working with, Provar will provide you a list of locators that you can select for those particular elements that are already they're given in advance. So you don't have to go into the HTML and figure out what you're dealing with and how to locate elements and worry about how to interact with them or anything like that. All the heavy lifting on that is done as far as the interaction. You only need to select the valid locator for that particular element, and then the rest is generated behind the scenes.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see.
There's a question here which I think is at a higher level than maybe the applications, which is talking about how would you go about implementing change requests and how would you manage those into an org? So again, I think really good question. I think it's something that everybody struggles with. I've seen everything from send me an email, it'll go in an Excel spreadsheet, building cases, building custom objects inside Salesforce using Jira. I think we need to take a step back and just think about what an incoming change request looks like from an end user. So you're getting almost sometimes low-level requests from end users. You're maybe getting big change requests that are coming through from business initiatives. And think of those as either feedback, like I'd like a new field, could you give me better help? So they could be at a very low level all the way through to we want Einstein. So we need some way of triaging those and turning them into business requirements. So think of business requirements which are separate from user stories. A business requirement is an outcome. So that business requirement is going to be a higher level defined by the business. A user story is going to be the technical piece of work that needs to get done. So a requirement may have multiple user stories. That user story may touch a number of metadata items. So I'm obviously going to be biased. I would suggest that Elements is the best place for capturing feedback, requirements, and user stories because those are all interrelated. But we do have customers who use their own approach, and They use their own approach for, they've got their own extended application they've built for capturing requirements, but then they use us for user stories because then it's tightly integrated into Jira. But I think the most important thing around this whole thing is you need a standard way where it's not to capture all those requirements, triage, prioritize them, allocate them to releases, and then link them to user stories. And you need some way of doing that formally. And I would suggest Excel is not the right approach. If you start thinking about using Salesforce cases, that rapidly becomes, the case object becomes a mess. And we're dealing with people with 150 million case records, because the case gets used for everything. So I would suggest you think about moving it outside of Salesforce in a more formalized approach. And if you go to our website, there's quite a lot of information about how you would manage requirements. Sorry, that was a long answer to a relatively short question, but I think it's actually more fundamental about how you drive the development or the DevOps cycle, which I think people are struggling with. And when you start applying tools like Elements, Provar, things like Capado, when we're actually rebuilding or reinventing that the whole development DevOps cycle, you need to take a step back and think about where the value of this data and where it's being held.
Thank you. Let's see. I have a question that I can answer, but can you please show the take screenshot function in Provar? According to the standard rules of live demos, never do a live demonstration. So Paul, I'll just tell you the way that works is when you're creating a test step, there is basically a clickable field in the test step that says take a screenshot, and it's either a particular section of the screen, which is the field that you're looking at, or the entire screen. So whenever you're adding a test step in Provar, there will be a field that you can click that'll allow you to take a screenshot of either the specific area or the entire screen. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing there, Alex. So that's if you want to always take a screenshot, so that'll happen in the event of a pass. But if you're wanting to see like failures and that kind of thing in terms of reporting, that will happen automatically. You don't have to configure that for every test step. So if a test step fails for any reason in the UI, then you'll automatically see a screenshot when you go to look at the report for that particular test run.
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent addition. I don't see any more questions. Ian, do you have any coming up that you want to?
The questions just come in. You probably didn't see it. How does Provar work with CPQ? I think what's interesting is that when we think about how applications work, whether it's Provar or Elements, you need to think about what's on the platform and what isn't. CPQ is a managed package which sits on top of the platform, and therefore then that's easy to deal with, versus say something like Pardot, which is actually a different something outside the platform. So from an Elements perspective, any managed packages, anything that sits on the side of the platform, we're doing all that analysis for you automatically. Anything that's outside the platform, you can still link from a user story to it, but we're not doing all the dependency tree analysis for you automatically. That's from an Elements perspective, but from a Provar perspective?
From a Provar perspective, the answer is it works like it does for the rest of Salesforce. In other words, we understand CPQ related metadata, and so you would build a test just like what you saw me build in the demo. And in fact, that example was creating an opportunity in Salesforce CPQ. So it's basically the same. Michael, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think that's just it. I think you and Ian are on the right track there. I think it's the same way it handles anything else seems like a bit of a cop-out answer, but that's pretty much the simplest answer is usually the correct one.
All right. So I think just to say thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate the time that you took out of your day, or in some cases your evening, to learn about Elements and Provar. And we hope that now you have a clear picture of, man, if you're dealing with something as complex as Salesforce and as customer facing as so many components of Salesforce tend to be, that having Elements.cloud as a way to really understand what's going on in your org and a way to keep track of changes and understand in advance the effect that the change is going to have and the risk associated with making those changes, and being able to use all of that information to drive and focus your test resource with a tool like Provar, then that's exactly what we wanted you to have in mind. If you want to ask us more questions, if you've got comments, if you want to find out more about what we do, you can reach out to us directly at this contact information, or if you prefer, just follow us on your favorite social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you like. Thanks again, everybody. It's been a pleasure, and have a great rest of your day.